I'll think of something.
Okay.
I'll think of something later. All right. You ready to come back in? So I'm gonna get into probably his. So he's known for a lot of different stuff, but in the West, I'd say there are two really well known titles that most people have read or picked up if they've read Ito, and the first one is obviously Uzumaki. We've briefly mentioned it. The second one though is one that I know Eric hasn't read, but should definitely maybe give a check just because it's kind of different from what he usually does, and that's Gyo. Now, Gyo is the best way I could describe just the plot simply is it is fish with legs and wings. I'm not kidding. It's fish that have legs and wings and come onto the land. And it starts off very much like kind of like a B horror movie, like an invasion type thing.
That's weird.
Yeah, and it's not, and you wouldn't think that for Ito either because most of his stories aren't quite about that. And then it becomes a gas virus that is turning people into sort of these types of... It's a completely different thing almost. And what's interesting about that is that it feels more like an actual Ito work at that point. Whereas in the first part, feels like a B horror movie or something. It feels almost like a zombie invasion type thing. Or like one of those 50s sort of horror movies where you've got like the giant spiders invading the town, or the Blob, or the killer tomatoes.
I mean, it's not an approach I wouldn't see him do, but it is rather interesting.
It's interesting to see him do something like this, and there are moments where I wouldn't say it's like the scariest, but it's scary in that like I think most people are fucking scared of sharks and things like being. Like the scariest part is there's a chapter when people are in the ocean and there's a shark coming at them, and they go out of the ocean like, oh yay, we're safe, and then the shark comes onto the out of the ocean onto the land with its legs and runs up and just eats everybody.
Oh my god, that is the most terrifying thing ever.
Yeah, so it's. I read this actually on a plane because I was taking my flight and I needed some stuff to read. So this was one of the ones I read, and it's something you don't want to eat while eating. There's it's like because it gets into the gas stuff, and there's a lot of stuff about like how these people get infected with this gas that the fish are like spreading, who are basically dead, but they've got these like mechanical tubes or something of them that is sprouting out legs and wings and shit. Yeah, and this is doing it to humans eventually. And basically they spread this like really sick gas that's basically like maybe coming from their butt and mouth. Not kidding. These tubes that are going in like their mouth and anus. And that's the nicest way I could put it. And and they're just like really disgusting looking as well. They're like, they get like really fat and bladed, and their skin like looks like it's like they've got like, it doesn't look like it's rotting. It just looks like they're kind of puffy, and they've got like little spots and shit on them. And it just gets kind of it's like probably his grossest work, I'd say. Like
that sounds Uzumaki and some other things he did are starting to sound a little bit nicer. Even the what is it? Because I read a collection of his short stories. I'm just trying to remember it. Oh yeah, most
of them are kind of just bloody. I would say, like they have a bit of blood in them.
Yes, because there's one short story in his collection, Yami no Koe, which the very first story, which describes vampire bats in Japan. Already weird, but that's what it is. And they have been
Yep.
And these vampire bats have been sucking, human blood, and then from this one person, and then they start spitting it at this anorexic girl. So it was creepy as hell.
I would say the
But this just sounds really
I would say the
gross.
closest he gets of this sort of grossness and this sort of like feeling of I don't know if I'd say horror, it's definitely like gross, it's gory sort of thing, would be Shiver, which is one of his other short stories, which they did adapt into the animated feature thing as well, where it's about people that have got like holes on their body, and they keep on getting all these little holes, and that's actually a phobia. Some people have like phobias of hives and things like that, like holes and things. And if you read Shiver and you had that phobia, it's really scary then at that point. But it's all about like people having these little holes like suddenly appearing on their body, and that's kind of like the closest he gets with kind of grossing you out or making you like kind of sick reading it. Because this one definitely does that. I'd say the biggest pros for this is that it is well drawn, but it is like it is one of like ones where some of his other works, I'd say, like when you get into the characters in this do kind of just look kind of samey. Like there's nothing really super distinct about them except for the scientist. He is very distinct. Like you look at him straight away, like, oh yeah, that's the scientist. They do kind of just look like other characters that would fit in his other short stories. But I would say, it's definitely got some nice surprises and twists, like with the fact that it starts off with these fish that are coming on, and you think it's just going to be like a zombie invasion, creatures coming into the city type thing. But then it turns into like a virus thing, and it's all about surviving through this, and the guy being mostly by himself, and then like him trying to help his girlfriend, and there's a creepy circus at one point, that's kind of taking advantage of this, and they've kind of gone nuts. So there's stuff like that that's really interesting. But I would say the biggest cons don't read this while eating. It's a little long in parts. It does drag a bit. The main female character is right most of the time. Like she's right about what's going on, but she's really annoying, and you don't really care for her that much.
That's a bad move. Then.
Yeah, and I'd say it's not nearly as interesting as Uzumaki, but it is an interesting read, and there is an animated version of it, but it's really terrible CG, and I wouldn't recommend it. So that's Gyo. And since Eric's touched on it, let's get into his short story collection. So I have a copy of it, actually, in Japanese when I was in Japan. But I bought... The one I've got is mostly just Tomie stories. I think they released it around the time of the animated series they did of his. And there's also There's more than one collection of his short stories, and his Tomie ones, the art varies because you can tell with some of the earlier ones he was learning how to be an artist. They're a little bit rough. It seems like with some of them, like maybe the ink or the paint was, you know what I mean by like the inking on it seems a little bit rough. Like you can the outlines of the characters seem a little bit more thicker than they should be. Stuff like that. So that was like my complaint sort of when I was reading some of the earlier ones. But you can see him really progress as an artist and get really good. There's some really good ones that got adapted into anime, and usually the best ones from those collections are the ones that are obviously the best animated. Because the anime was it was all right. I enjoyed it. With Ito's work, with the exception of Uzumaki, I'm kind of fine with his stuff not being, hugely detailed Kyoto animation style anime. I don't expect that. It's a horror thing. It's meant to be a bit gross or a bit cheap looking, and some of his stuff is kind of B-grade horror. So I don't expect it to be, 100% amazing looking. So, that's one complaint I've heard, but I would say give it a go, especially episode 2. Of the anime, which adapts the model story line. Now, do you know about the model?
No, it doesn't ring a bell, unfortunately.
Okay, I'll explain it. So the model, basically, these guys are... our main character is a script writer, and they are working on a short film or something. And basically, he sees this model in a catalog because he's looking for actresses or something or people to inspire him. And he sees this woman that's just frightening. She's got this really long face and like sort of sharp eyes and this long nose, and something just doesn't look right about her. And he's just completely shaken by her appearance, and he can't focus. But then he eventually talks to his friend, he describes what he's seeing, and he manages to get it out of his head for a bit, and he gets the script done, and they do something together. And we don't really see that product. He then teams up with his friend again, and they say, okay, we need to hold auditions because we need an actress for this. And they get one young lady who they think looks pretty good and will do good for the part. And then the girl who he saw in that model catalog is coming in for the audition as well. She's also on the sheet of people they could audition. And his director sees the girl and goes, well, she looks very distinct. I've never seen anybody who looks like this. We should, this could definitely, get some attention. So they bring her in, and she's very quiet, and something seems very off about her, and there's just something not right about her. And they drive in a car with her out into the middle of the woods to do this filming for what basically could be a horror movie, because they're filming out in the middle of the woods where there's no one else out there, and they're like just talking, and they tell a joke or something, and she starts laughing. And when she opens her mouth, she has these sharp razor teeth. And she's got that long face, as I mentioned. So she's got these massive, like, sharp teeth and just cackling. And they get out of the car. They go to film this shoot. And this director, before they got in the car, offhandedly mentioned, hey, our scriptwriter has a crush on you, which has just made it even worse now for our scriptwriter, because now this girl just doesn't want to leave his side and just keeps on sort of standing near him. And she's kind of trying to make him, you can almost feel like she's trying to make him uncomfortable. Because he even just goes off just to say, oh, I've got to wash something in my face. And she follows him. And then he tries to run away, and she chases after him. And it just gets more and more crazy from there. It kind of goes where you expect it does, and some, it's not completely unpredictable.
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking at the drawing of the model,
it's
and
still, wow. Yeah. And the anime does a good job with this. I would recommend the sub over the dub on this, because I think the voice actor they got on the sub was a little bit more scarier. The dub voice actor they've got, some people said this in the comments, and I agree with them. She does sound a little too pretty and a little too nice. The one they got for the Japanese was just creepy as hell. So that's a good one. And then the other one they did really good with was there's one of the woman next door. I don't know if that's exactly what it's called. I think it's called The Neighbor or something. Basically, this guy, and Ito does a lot of this sort of urban legend thing where, you've got to answer something or listen to something. And basically, he is sleeping next door when this woman keeps talking to him and goes, young man, you're a very handsome young man. When are you going to come visit me? And she keeps on doing this every night. And then one night he opens the window and he sees her, and she's this grotesque purple sort of it's hard to describe her. She's very visually striking. And in the manga, because they didn't color her, there's something about the black and white sort of color that just really makes her off-putting. And she keeps on talking to this man every night until one night she puts the stick across the window and says she's going to come across. And he pushes the stick off. But then we see by the end of the story that at one point she tried to reach across with her hands, and the whole room on her side of the house has magically moved closer to his.
What?
Yeah, and that's the end of that story. At least in the anime. In the manga, they're like, oh yeah, maybe we should move house. So that was one of my favorites.
There's another thing to point out about Junji Ito's works. A lot of his works have something of a reality bending theme to it. There's no sense of, horror can sometimes be about, bending reality, but that's just when there's a definite, being or a definite source of this. But in most of Junji Ito's work, we don't know what that source is.
Yeah. So what were some of your favorite short stories of his, Eric?
Well, this is from the Yami no Kohei collection. There's one which was, there's no horror in it, but the concept itself is very horrifying because what it is a story about these people who are, appear to be standing in random places all over Japan. And they're standing in, various poses. They're standing still there. They're fully aware of what's going on. They don't need to eat or drink either. But these people were called the Earthbound because they can't move and they just stay there. And people have been trying to figure out why. And there's this one girl who's volunteered for an organization which helps these people, the Earthbound. And she's talking to everyone, trying to help these people. And one day, one of her boss ends up being Earthbound in her room. And at first she believes they're Earthbound because she believes they're Earthbound because of an emotional attachment to this place. Like if you love something, you'll stay there. But later on, she finds out from this young boy who's been Earthbound next to a gravestone of his dog that apparently this is not Earthbound to a happy emotion, but Earthbound to a place of guilt. So each of these people are standing in poses straight on the spot because they're guilty about something. And then you figure out what each person, what some of these people are guilty about. Yeah. So you find out that the boy is standing Earthbound next to his dog because he's guilty about killing it. You find out another guy was, standing in this in the bushes because he killed someone. You can see someone's skull there. You can see, another guy who's Earthbound in a bank wearing a motorcycle helmet and all that. He was going to
rob it.
He would have robbed the place previously, and all these other various things. And you find out that the guy, the boss who's Earthbound in the girl's room, was there because prior to this, the girl was had moved places because in her previous place she was burgled and raped.
Yep. And
we found out that it was her boss who did that, and he was Earthbound because of his guilt and what he did. So there was no real blood, gore, or terrifying imagery. But the whole
concept is frightening.
The concept is frightening that if you have this massive sense of guilt, you're basically stuck to the spot. And now people find out that, you're there because of this. Oh, yeah, and one more. There's this old guy who's stuck outside this corner. And you find out that he did a hit and run on a little girl.
Shit.
Yeah, I know. So you see, that was one. And I think my other favorite one is one where two hikers, this is again no gore, but itself is pretty horrifying. Two hikers had been climbing up and find out that there was a river had broken through a dam and had washed away a village. So they're standing next to a river which is rushing through, and there's this, there's these buildings and people going there. And then suddenly it all disappears, and suddenly it just looks like the river, is old and like nothing had gone through there. They later find out that this was an illusion, cursed to repeat itself until something happens to it.
Yep.
They find this out from the old guy who's up there, and watching it because he used to live in the village that got flooded. And he's been trying to catch the ghost of his wife who keeps getting washed away. And, by the end of it, you find out that one of the hikers, who you get a bit of a backstory on, may have been the son of that man and the woman who were washed away. But the sad part about the end of this story is that, it'll probably never be confirmed, or he believes it. Because we know it's probably true, but him, in his mind, in the character's mind, it's like, I'll never know, and neither will my father or mother.
I think, as I said before, the biggest theme of all these short stories is that they are kind of urban legendy. Would you agree with me on that?
Something on that,
yeah. So I think the biggest thing we need to touch on, and I think you may have not read these, but did you read any Tomie stories? Because they are in her short story. She's the girl with black hair It's got kind of a fringe. She's very prominent in a lot of his works. And he's made one other attempt at making a character like Tomie, but I would say she's not as interesting. So Tomie is basically, she's in at least, I think, 4 different stories of his. And the best way I can describe her, so she basically, let me just see where I've written some notes on her. So the best way I would describe her is she basically takes people, basically turns up, she's a completely immortal girl, and she'll turn up and she'll completely manipulate people to the point where they will try and kill her. And this happens in a number of stories. I think one of the first or second stories she's introduced into, she basically is murdered by her entire classroom, who think she falls from a tree, and they think she's dead, and they try to cut her up to hide the body. And then they find out she's still alive, and they continue cutting her up, and then they dump the body in the ocean. So that's like one of her first stories. Her one of the most prominent, well, one of the ones that got adapted was her one where she is she has basically become sort of a model, because this guy has got his model. He's doing an art thing, and she likes his art, and she says, "Oh, I like your art. You're a good painter." And he's very intrigued by her and wants to have her as his model. And she basically comes in, insults his current model, and she has to leave. So he's put in a situation where he needs a new model. So of course he asks Tomie. And he's kind of obsessed with her. He kind of can't get the image of her out of his mind. And so he eventually paints her. And something sort of twists in the painting. There's like an extra head or something popping up. There's something just not right about it. And Tomie looks at it and says, "This is horrible," and breaks it. And this just snaps the guy. And the guy ends up killing a previous artist and tries to, then kill Tomie. And that's like one of the stories. And then probably my favorite that I was reading on the plane is there's the story, you think it's going to go one way and it completely goes in another direction. And basically this old man and old woman, it shows them with this orphan girl at the start of the story. And it makes us believe that they've kidnapped this orphan girl and they're trying to suck her youth and kill her. And basically they're just weirdly sucking on her skin and stuff and saying, "We're taking her youth." And we think at the start of the story that they murder all these girls because all these orphan girls have been kidnapped and then gone missing. And then one night Tomie is out there and she's unconscious and she's laying out there in the cold. And so they pick her up and she says, "I have no family, I have no one, you've got to take me in." So they take her in as their daughter and they love her. And slowly Tomie twists and turns the people around her. She twists this poor innocent grandma who may or may not have actually been, trying to get the youth of these people. But she's basically, she actually likes Tomie and she actually treats her like a good daughter, and she buys her dresses and takes care of her and does her hair and all this. And the old man is just, he's the old man, he's the dad, They're just doing their thing and they're trying to be good parents. But then Tomie basically manipulates this old lady to the point where she kills herself. And we find out slowly that the maid is actually the one who's been killing these young girls.
Oh, wow.
Not the elderly people. But we're made to believe that. But then the story ends with somehow, after all of this and the old woman dying, the old man has also been manipulated by Tomie to the point where he kills her. But then he also kills the maid. And then he also kills himself. And Tomie is completely immortal. So she comes back to life and gets to be the one survivor of this whole thing and gets to play the victim in it.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah, it was a really good story. It's probably one of the best ones of Tomie. Now, he did try this again, and I can't remember I didn't read this one. I just saw it when they did the anime. There is one of this young guy who comes to the town and he joins the supernatural club or whatever. And he keeps on discovering these new things just around the supernatural, around their city. And the first thing is he discovers flowers that have eyeballs on them. The second thing, he discovers a waterfall that's just completely, there was like a whole city or something there, and it's just gone, and now it's a waterfall. So apparitions just keep on appearing, and he just keeps on seeing them, and he does this through the whole story. And like Tomia, he kind of manipulates the other characters around them. Like he suggests to one character, "Hey, you could get look at me, I can shoot lasers out of my hands." And he goes, "You could do that too. You've just got to go under the waterfall." So this guy goes under the waterfall. His mate hears about this and says, "Well, I want power as well." So he tosses his mate into the water and then goes under the waterfall himself and gains power. But his mate then becomes a zombie and comes back. So yeah, it's a bit of an odd story, and I'd say the character, he's clearly trying to do the Tomie sort of thing again. It's not as interesting, but it's still kind of an interesting story. But overall, I'd say his short stories, some of them are good, some of them are just not that scary. They're just interesting. The circus one that I haven't even brought up is just sad, where it's scary, but it's just sort of just tragic. Where it's the circus that's cursed, basically, where everybody in the circus has this crush on this one girl, and they all try to impress her, and every time they do, they die through it. Like, and they're all. Do you mean like doing tricks on the? They're all performers, yeah. So okay. one of them, they're tightrope brokes. One of the clowns like goes to save her at the end of the story, and we find out that one of the knives that missed previously from the knife thrower has been hanging up on this little ledge, and it falls down and kills the guy. Oh man! Yeah, so little things like that, and this guy is. We find out the ringmaster is like basically feeding off of people's enjoyment and their souls of basically of the dead, of the souls of these dead people who he's bringing in. So that was really interesting. So Eric, is there anything else you want to touch on before we get into Uzumaki? No, not really. That's pretty much it. So we can go. Okay, so let's get into his most well-known work and my favorite work, Uzumaki. So Uzumaki is mostly a manga. It's gonna be an animated thing soon. I'm looking forward to that, depending on what they do with it. Do you know who the studio is? I don't know yet, and I'm hoping it's not a full CGI thing. I'm hoping it's kind of a 2D thing, but who knows? But the live action is actually pretty good. They did they actually visually captured like a lot of the stuff really well, which is really surprising. So they did that, and then there is there's a movie, there's a animation thing coming, and there's this manga. And I would say the biggest difference I want to touch on here with this work that really struck me, because this was the first thing I read of his, and I thought this was going to be the case of all of them. But, and Eric will probably agree with me on this, there isn't really any blood or gore in Uzumaki. There is one little part where there is some, but it's rather rare. It's very rare, and the main focus and the main... Like when it's focusing on the spirals as a theme in this, which that's what Uzumaki basically means. It's the spirally things you eat in your ramen. It's like the little seaweed things. He his main theme in this is spirals and people killing themselves or going insane or obsessed with spirals. And they basically contort their body in some sort of way, in a spirally kind of way. And that's most of the ways people die in these stories, or their hair, or something twist or something on their face. It's not necessarily someone getting stabbed or bloody or something like that. Not that that doesn't happen. It's not the prominent theme in this, I'd say. A lot of this is to do with curses and nihilism and a cursed town. It's very similar to sort of, I'd say, like Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft, or like a lot of the themes of this.
It's definitely the case.
I'm going to bring up the two characters here. So Shunichi, the main dude, who's not exactly our main character. Our main character is Kirie. She's a young girl in the city, or town, I'd say. It's not even a city. But Shunichi is very much, and Eric probably hasn't seen this. I don't think he's seen Reanimator. But if you've seen Reanimator and you read this, Shunichi is 100% probably based off Jeffrey Combs from that movie. He's got the same sort of glasses, same sort of hairstyle. He's the only character that could pass for Japanese, but look kind of American. You know, most of the other characters, they've got like Western hairstyles, but you can tell they're sort of Japanese. And the art with this, I would say, is even more detailed than some of his other works. I'd say like every character you look at this is distinct. Like the biggest flaw I didn't bring up with the short stories that kind of ran through all of them is that some of the character designs they seem like they've been reused, or they're very similar. Like there's a lot of characters that are just black hair, white shirt, black pants. That's it. You know, and there's like at least 50 characters in his short stories that have that. Whereas this one, like even though people have uniforms, the hairstyles are very distinct. Like they're never exactly the same. Like Kirie has this very like detailed sort of what would you call it? Like she's got sort of like each hairline is very detailed versus Shinichi, which is just like jet black hair, but he's got this very paranoid look on his face, big glasses. As I said, very much looks like Jeffrey
dark
Combs.
Shadows under his eyes. That's I kind of feel sorry for him, especially with what he went through in the story.
Yeah. So how do you want to touch on this? Do you want to touch on the characters first, or do you want to touch on, because I've mostly done
the character with regards to the characters, there isn't too much of an interest in them except for the characters that have been affected by the spiral.
I would say everything. So this town is basically kind of haunted, and everybody in this town is affected by it. But the main thing is it's everybody around Shunichi and Kirie. At first, that's the main gist of the story. So, our first victim is Shunichi's father, who becomes obsessed with spirals to the point where he is able to contort his eyes in a way that make his eyes spin around. He can't eat his soup without the uzumaki in it, the thing I was describing, the fish flakes. Or if like his soup is spiraling a bit, he can't like sit in his bath and it's a whirlpool. And this gets to the point where he contorts himself and puts himself in like a big box, a circular box, where he basically, you could say, crushes himself, or kind of... he does something that's physically impossible, but it's still kind of like scary and kind of... well, I wouldn't say it's just kind of... It's uneasy to look at, but really very visually striking. That's the thing. Like, Junji Ito will create something that's not pleasant to look at, but you can't take your eyes off of it because it's so well detailed and so interesting to look at.
Yeah, until we get to the snail people.
Yeah. So, we won't get into them yet because I want to talk about as well the fact that Shinichi's mother, I think, is the most interesting thing he did, because he goes from making a character that's obsessed with spirals to a character that is completely afraid of spirals.
Has a phobia of them.
Yeah, to the point where she chops off her fingertips, she cuts her hair, and she gets to the point where she...
stabs her own ears out.
Yeah, well, everybody keeps to try to hide the fact that in your ear you have something called a cochlea, which looks like basically a snail. It's got this little spirally sort of thing in it. And everybody tries to hide that. But eventually this fort that everybody keeps on trying to hide this, and she's just getting so paranoid that she's thinking, no, why do they keep on hiding it? She gets to the point where she's like, well, there must be something in there. So she just stabs her eardrum. and it causes her to have, and this was scary for me to read because I've actually had damage to my left eardrum.
Yeah.
Not as severe, but definitely like not in a fun way. She gets to the point where she has like permanent basically vertigo. So she's in a spiral for the rest of her life, which is frightening to me due to the fact that I have vertigo.
Well, I mean, she doesn't exactly live long enough to really suffer the consequences.
Yeah. Well, most characters do not survive in Uzumaki, we'll just say that.
Yeah, up to where I'm reading, I'm surprised, there's even a story to go with because it just seems to have escalated so badly from there.
Yeah. And Kirie, who we've mentioned, she is been in the town for years. She doesn't really like the town.
Well, actually, she doesn't really...
She doesn't mind. She doesn't want to necessarily leave it, but she doesn't love it. She's kind of that angsty teen character. And her father is affected by this as well when he has to bury these people who have died from this, Shinichi's parents.
Yeah.
And when he puts them in the coven, eventually they sort of burn in a certain way that mystifies him and creates these horrible artifacts, these horrible plates, and they're spiraling and have these horrific looks in them. And
basically people's faces.
Yeah, and it just gets to the point where it gets too much and it burns down and then she has her hair grows really long and kind of spirals, and there's more stories from there. There are other ones I could get into, but I'm going to let Eric talk about some of the other plot points that he liked and stories he liked.
Well, in Uzumaki especially, that was, I think, one of them. I think because you mentioned something about, Kirie and how she wasn't really affected by the spiral. Thing is, you do forget that one story about when her hair was affected by the spiral.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. Her hair grows really long and gets kind of spirally.
So, yeah, her hair, she's affected by the spiral in two direct places. Her hair, which apparently comes to life on itself and tries to mesmerize people, and is challenged by another girl with the same sort of issue. Now, Kirie gets rescued by Shuichi. Shunichi? What was it? How do you say his name? Shunichi.
Who cuts her hair.
Yeah, who cuts her hair after it almost kills him. And so that was after he figured out that the hair actually sucks your life force. Of course, the other girl didn't figure that out until her, she out,
Which kind of goes with the spiraling theme because her life is solely spiraling, into her older age.
Yeah, something like that. And then the second part where she's directly affected is from the Eye of the Storm two-part stories where a literal typhoon comes into the middle of the town and the eye of it is watching her and is apparently interested and infatuated with her. And because this is a storm, it controls, things in the way a storm would. It blows buildings apart. It blows trees around. It just tries to stop everyone else from going to her. It accidentally sucked someone up when they thought it was Kirie. And it was really interesting. And so, it's come to a point that all parts of the town that were described at the start of the story have been cursed. The dragonfly pond, the lighthouse, the everything.
Can we touch on? So there's one story that it's scary. It's not scary, but it's just kind of like what the fuck, and then it's kind of like sad at the same time. Which is the guy who has a crush on Kirie that keeps on. He has this gag where he keeps on trying to surprise her. He keeps on jumping out of places.
Jack in the Box. Yep.
Yeah, he keeps on surprising her, and he gives her this Jack in the Box. And by the end of the story, he comes back to life because he dies. He gets hit by a car, and in like a really realistic and horrible way.
Oh my God!
He basically comes back and does the same shit. But now, since he doesn't have a body, his body is basically slowly mangling off of him. To the point where his spine turns into like a literal spring.
Actually,
it's actually we find out it's not his spine. It's the what part would you say it's of the car?
It was the brake spring, I think it was.
Yeah, it's the brake spring from the car that is stuck in him. has now become the spring on him that lets his body spring up and down like a jack-in-the-box and chase after him. And you're just like, what the fuck?
Oh, yeah, that is a very, very decent
It was a very crazy story. So let's get into some of our cons, because I do have some issues with this manga. I love most of it, as I said, and I like the ending actually of this as well. Even though it's a really sad ending and I won't spoil it because I think people do need to read this.
Yeah, don't spoil it for me. I haven't finished reading it yet.
Yeah, but I don't know how. Well, did you get to the baby part?
You mean the
nursery part where the hospital?
Oh, yeah, I got to that part.
Okay, so my biggest con with this is some of the story arcs do not have anything to do with spirals whatsoever. And I don't like it because it's not that the stories are bad, it's just it feels like it should be in another one of his works. Like there's a story with these babies that are essentially they're killing everybody. These women are giving birth to babies that are killing people and giving them youth and all. It's pretty nuts. Yeah, and it's an interesting story, and it's good, it's well drawn and all that, but it seems really out of place in this story because it's got nothing to do with spirals, and it's not really the haunted town, it's just a shit hospital with creepy babies, and that's really it. And some of the storylines just don't make any sense. Like there's one with two lovers that have been separated by their parents. And then at the end of the story, they just
the Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, and it feels a bit cheesy. And then at the end of the story, they just spiral at joined together.
Yeah, like those two snakes that they see early on.
Yeah,
that's weird.
Yeah, so those are my biggest cons. What about you, Eric?
Honestly, I have almost no cons to this. I would wish some of his other stories that were short stories were a bit longer. But I mean, overall, he's got a good angle on horror. I like his drawings; they're creepy as hell. He's got some really great ideas for a concept as horror, and his characters. Actually, maybe that's one con I'd have. Some of his characters are so bland and uninteresting.
Yeah,
I almost forget about them.
I'd agree with you, especially in some of his short stories. I would 100% agree with you. That's would you say that's the biggest between that and Uzumaki? Because I think Uzumaki, the characters are really well defined.
Yeah,
and like I could show you a picture of the character and you'd know that's that character. Yeah. If I showed you one of his short stories, you'd be like, "Wait, is that character or that character?"
There are some issues with how he puts his characters into his stories because most of his characters don't seem to be in the foreground at all. You know, they're the background. And what's in the foreground is not even the main characters sometimes. It's the horror element itself that's there. You know, whether it's the event, a creature, or just, one of these spiral things, that's the foreground.
So I wanted to just bring up there was one other story I forgot to mention as well, which is, I don't know how you felt about this, but there was one spiral storyline that I didn't like at all, which is the woman with like the dot on her head that is fascinating people. Oh, that was just kind of, I don't know, something about that just made me uncomfortable, and then I just didn't enjoy it. Like it wasn't that kind of enjoyable, uncomfortable.
It seemed to make sense at the start because when they got this whole idea about a spiral being mesmerizing, and you just can't stop staring at it because it looks so beautiful.
Yeah.
But to end it like that, with the girl being, what is it?
Like she's got like a weird spiral on it, sucked in. I thought that was. See, that's the one part I didn't mind. I thought that was kind of interesting, but just the weird.
I don't know how it transitioned.
Small spot thing just made me uncomfortable reading it for some reason.
I don't know. It was a weird little thing.
So I'm gonna give two honorable mentions because there's two stories we haven't mentioned. One I'm surprised Eric didn't read. So Junji Ito mostly does horror. He's mostly a horror writer, and that's what he does most of the time. He has done two almost non-horror stories. So the first one is, I don't remember the full title, but it's called Rasputin something.
Yeah, yes.
And did you read any of it?
No, I did not.
Okay, so it's mostly about like business and government and stuff. Like, I'm not kidding, that's what it's about. And I don't mind it, but
Wait a second. Is that the one? Is that the one where this guy gets framed for something during the Cold War era?
No. So this isn't present day or something.
Oh, okay.
But Rasputin, this guy's meant to be like the reincarnate, or like they reckon he's very similar to Rasputin.
Okay.
But it's Japanese, and it's kind of just weird, but not like a horror or anything. It's not like scary and his art is more like what I was describing with some of his early short stories, where it's not bad, but it's not great either. And then the other one I want to bring up that people may have seen is one called No Longer Human. That's a really good. That's an adaptation of a Osamu Dazai work, which I think we will touch on in a later review, because there is a better version of that animated that we could talk about. It's not based off Ito's version, but Ito did do a version of it, and that's a lot about nihilism and depression and that sort of thing, and abuse. And it's interesting. It's an interesting read. So that's one that's kind of interesting, and it simplifies some elements of that story so you can get it. And then the last one I want to just briefly touch on is Black Paradox. Yeah.
Is it Black Paradox?
I didn't want to completely go into a full review or pros and cons on this, but it's just an interesting concept. It's these four people, or it's 4 or 5 people in a car, basically go out and they're going to commit suicide. And then another car turns up right next to them, and it's them. It's basically double gangers of them. And from then on, these double gangers are basically trying to kill them.
Wow.
And that's the story. So, yeah, I wanted to briefly mention that. So, yeah, this has been alternating with Eric. And you guys can check us out on the Instagram at Insert Connor here. We have a YouTube page that is now finally set up. It's just called Alternating with Eric. And it has most of our videos up. We still need an intro video.
That's probably why I couldn't find it. Because the name changed. Oops.
Yeah, so we still need an intro video. We did film one, but I want a better one. So we'll put a better one up. And I'm going to try and put as many episodes up there as I can. Because I have to, all the old content that was on there needs to go somewhere else. So I'm just sorting that out as well, so I can have a separate page for that. And then we also, you can, if you need to ask me anything, my email is insertcast@hotmail.co.nz. If you need to email us anything, any questions or requests, maybe you want to say our last episode was shit, and then we'll, not send you anything back.
And please no hate mail.
Oh, no. Send us that and we'll read it on air. I'll make Eric read all of it on air.
You want me to read hate mail on air?
Yes.
Why?
It'd be fun. Maybe we'll we will get our friend Chung to come in and read it. That's what we'll do. Now, Eric, what is our Facebook page?
Now, Facebook page is just simply alternating with Eric. This is where we have all our what was the name?
All of our episodes.
Yeah, all our podcasts, all our Let's Plays, and basically any sort of events or places we've gone to that's anime related. So you can see our August, our August Armageddon Expo video up there.
So,
and also pictures.
So this is we're recording this on Halloween. It's about 4 something now. So this episode will either be up tonight or it'll be up tomorrow. I'm going to try and get it up tonight, but if it's not up tonight, it'll be up tomorrow. This has been Alternating with Eric, episode 33. I'm Connor.
And I'm Eric.
Catch you later.
Bye.